Lesson 13, Levels of Knowledge. Now, what are the benefit of thinking about levels or different types of knowledge? You tend to gain deeper understanding. If you could see one subject or idea, tool, technique, theory from lots of different perspectives, a view that's called pluralism or multi-perspectivalism, there's lots of words for it, but looking at one different thing lots of different ways, you tend to have deeper understanding. You'll tend to make finer and better judgments about it. This is practically the definition of expertise, by the way, the ability to take multiple perspectives on one specialized domain of knowledge. So let's think about an example of mixing types of knowledge. Let's think about a cathedral. So a huge, often very old, occasionally modern, but often many hundreds of years old religious building. What is a cathedral? Well, it's often a fantastic piece of architecture. It's phenomenal engineering. I mean, built without modern techniques if it was built hundreds of years ago, and yet incredibly strong and effective as a piece of engineering. It's also a piece of art. Cathedrals are often very, very beautiful. It's a symbol, so they're often built around a Christian cross, and that's what they represent within that religious ethos. They're a place of worship and, of course, teaching, of disseminating those views. They're part of a power hierarchy, not just in the community, but also within the religion, within the nation state, and internationally. They're, of course, a very powerful community centre. People meet there and do things together there. Concert hall, you get a lot of wonderful music at cathedrals. There's often an enormous organ. Musical instruments are played, very, very powerful stuff. It's a historical artifact, of course. Cathedrals are often very, very old, and they give you deep insight to history. They're an economic achievement. Just think of the amount of stone and artwork and craft that goes into such a thing. And therefore you could think of a cathedral as the centre of long supply chains. Where did that stone come from? If you think about the amount of stone in an ancient cathedral, it's mind-blowing. How was that transported? How was all the art and all the decoration and all the flooring, how on earth did that converge to one point in space and time? Cathedrals very, very popular, often with tourists and visitors. They're a place of meditation. Now, we could go on and on. Cathedrals represent lots and lots and lots of characteristics. We've just mentioned a few here. And here's the point. To truly have a deep understanding of this one thing, a cathedral, all these perspectives are valid. They're all important, and many more besides. So to become a true expert in a subject, you will be able to question, to understand, to see, to have knowledge from many, many different angles, many different theoretical views, many different topic-based biases, and so on. So you could see a business as a social thing, an economic thing, a point within networks of interaction between businesses and people, as a technological artifact, as a legal and accounting entity. All these different perspectives of business are, you might say, equally valid. And the more insight you have from each perspective, the better you can run and operate within a business. That is the point. So here's an example. You want to understand a new product or market. So a fairly recently developing or somewhat burgeoning market is tracking devices for pets. So particularly dogs. So it helps you know where your dog is and what it's doing. So you might, to understand that market, consider several perspectives. It's economic, right? So can you track this dog in a way that's economically justified? You have to pay for the device, and then you have to pay, in a sense, for your time to look at the computer, to look at the smartphone, to see what the dog is doing. Now, the value of that tracking presumably depends on the value of the dog. Some dogs are extremely valuable in the strict financial sense, and some aren't. Some are extremely valuable in the sense of emotional attachment from the human, and some aren't. So when you track a dog, it's a social thing, so there's humans involved, possibly with some attachment to the animal. Social and emotional, it has to be the right kind of design, the design for the human, but also the design for the dog, and also a suitable design for the economics for the vendor and the intermediaries, maybe the retailer. Tracking dogs is a strategic thing. I mean, it's strategic for the vendor, and maybe the owners view it as such, as in terms of a long-term investment in their family, in the sense that a lot of people view an animal as part of their family. Now, you might take a historical view on tracking animals, cultural, moral. Do you have moral problems with knowing where your dog is all the time? Probably not, but some people might think in those terms. So if you really want to understand the tracking market, it's well worthwhile taking many perspectives and then combining them and blending them. So the more perspectives you can take, the better you will remember, because remember, all these perspectives interlink and they tend to highlight the others. So the social affects the economic, the cultural affects the financial, and so on. 2, the better you see connections with other areas of knowledge, with more perspectives, and the better you understand those other areas as well. And as you blend perspectives, guess what? Novelty becomes more accessible. So the more creative are your insights. The more perspectives you can take on one subject, the more liable you are to have a new insight to that subject. And essentially, the more sophisticated you become as a person. So exercise 13.1, take any subject you want to understand better, such as it might be something to do with your work or study. Think about and research, what perspectives do you already tend to emphasize? What new perspective might be useful? How can you gain new understanding from the new perspective? So what is the process you need to go through to really get to grips with a new perspective? And what useful new insights are offered by the new perspective? How could you use it? How could you make it practical? Okay, lesson 13 summary. Pluralism, this ability to take multiple perspectives, is a very good way to deepen understanding of almost any topic. In fact, it is practically the definition of deep understanding. Pluralism is a requirement for deep understanding. Now, pluralism takes time because, of course, there is no limit to the number of different perspectives you can take, but the payback is often strong because, of course, the more connections you see, the more you will see for the future, the more creative you will become, and the more practical becomes your knowledge. So it may start as a slow and laborious process, but as you build up knowledge, it can accelerate and the insights come far more rapidly. So in the next lesson, we look at your ongoing development.